We live in interesting times. Today's stories. Russia launches a floating nuclear reactor in the Arctic despite warnings. Wildfires burn areas of the Bolivia rainforest. Brazil ex-minister Silva says the situation in the Amazon, quote, is out of control.
Fora de controle em função.
WWF says Brazil's laxity to police deforestation caused fires.
Al contrario, se está deforestando.
Surfers rally for the planet ahead of G7. Ukraine anti-vaccine protesters insist on rights despite the measles outbreak.
У сучасній ситуації взагалі
In DRC, Lake KIVU'S waters essential in the fight against Ebola. A strange walking disorder is crippling Florida's panthers and bobcats. Nigeria hails, quote, historic milestone after 3 years of being polio-free.
Years without a case of white polio virus.
Plus, reactions to Walmart removal of violent video game displays.
I think we could blame for all the violence.
This is Eagle News, broadcasting from Washington, D.C., bringing you stories from around the globe. I am Rose Papa Angeles. Russia launched the world's first floating nuclear reactor on Friday, sending it on an epic journey across the Arctic, despite environmentalists' warning of a, quote, Chernobyl on ice. Loaded with nuclear fuel, the academic Lomonosov left the Arctic port of Murmansk to begin its 5,000-kilometer or 3,000-mile voyage to Pevek in northeastern Siberia. Nuclear agency Rosatom says the reactor is a simpler alternative to building a conventional plant in isolated places where ground is frozen all year round, and it intends to sell such reactors abroad. The new reactor is part of the new floating energy and heat plant, which will be a key element in the development of the Northern Sea route and will help Russia realize large infrastructural projects in the region, Rosatom said in a statement. But environmental groups have long warned of the dangers of the project, dubbing it a potential Chernobyl on ice and a nuclear Titanic. A deadly explosion this month at a military testing site in Russia far north caused a radioactive surge, prompting further concerns. The reactor's trip is expected to last between 4 and 6 weeks, depending on the weather conditions and the amount of ice on the way. Bolivia is battling wildfires that have devastated large areas of its rainforest. Paris and the United Nations called Thursday for the protection of the fire-plagued Amazon rainforest as Brazil's right-wing president accuses French counterpart of having a colonialist mentality over the issue. Official figures show nearly 73,000 forest fires were recorded in Brazil in the first 8 months of the year, the highest number for any year since 2013. Most were in the Amazon. The extent of the area damaged by fire has yet to be determined, but smoke has choked São Paulo and several other Brazilian cities in the past week. UN Chief Antonio Guterres said he was, quote, deeply concerned by the fires. He said on Twitter, quote, in the midst of the global climate crisis, we cannot afford more damage to a major source of oxygen and biodiversity. The Amazon must be protected. France's President Emmanuel Macron said the wildfires were an international crisis and called on the globe's most industrialized nations to address it at their summit this weekend. Macron said on Twitter, quote, our house is on fire. Literally, the Amazon, the lung of our planet, which produces 20% of our oxygen, is burning. It is an international crisis. Members of the G7, let's talk in 2 days about this emergency. That did not sit well with Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro wrote on Twitter, quote, the French president's suggestion that Amazon issues be discussed at the G7 without participation by the countries in the region evokes a colonialist mentality that is out of place in the 21st century, unquote. Neighboring Peru, which contains much of the Amazon basin, announced it was on alert for wildfires spreading from the rainforest in Brazil and Bolivia. Paraguay and Bolivia are battling separate wildfires that have devastated large areas of their rainforests. Marina Silva, the former Environment Minister of Brazil, said the situation in the Brazilian Amazon, plagued by severe fires and deforestation, is, quote, out of control.
Nesse momento está fora de controle, em função de que temos 38 mil focos de queimadas de fogos, e isso representa 60% de todos os focos de calor e queimada que tem no Brasil. Estamos fazendo um movimento, ex-ministros, organizações da sociedade civil, e vamos dialogar com o Congresso Nacional para que suspenda todos os projetos de lei que são contrários ao meio ambiente. O problema é que o governo abandonou as políticas, abandonou o know-how e tem uma atitude de ojeriza com os cientistas da área ambiental, com os ambientalistas. Temos um país em recessão econômica e está acontecendo esse tipo de coisa. São incêndios e derrubadas criminosas de quem está invadindo áreas que não deveriam estar sendo ocupadas.
Manuel Pulgar Vidal, head of the WWF's Climate and Energy Practice, said the laxity on the part of Brazil's authorities to curb deforestation contributed to wildfires raging across the country.
No solo hay que manejar sosteniblemente la tierra, sino que hay que restaurar la tierra degradada. Y en Brasil está ocurriendo lo contrario, se está deforestando incluso con mayor intensidad que en el pasado. Comparativamente el crecimiento de los incendios en relación al año 2018 es de 81% de crecimiento de incendios. Entonces es claro que es el resultado de una laxitud de la política de control de la deforestación el día de hoy en Brasil.
Surfers gather in the French town of Guithrie to raise awareness for the planet and its oceans ahead of the G7 summit in neighboring Biarritz.
Aujourd'hui, en fait, on organise une rame pour ta planète. Donc, c'est un événement, une sorte de manifestation pour rassembler la communauté des surfeurs, pour justement se retrouver et en fait pouvoir porter la voix des océans et dénoncer notamment la pollution des océans, la pollution plastique.
Can't talk about inequity without talking about the oceans, because 1/3 of the world's population gets their primary source of protein from the oceans. The ocean is central to climate change. It's absorbing most of the heat and much of the carbon.
Up next, Ukraine anti-vaccine protesters insist on rights despite the missiles outbreak. In DRC, Lake Kivu's waters essential in the fight against Ebola. A strange walking disorder is crippling Florida's panthers and bobcats. Nigeria hails, quote, historic milestone after 3 years of being polio-free. These stories and more when Eagle News returns. Stay with us. Some 200 anti-vaccine protesters rallied in Kiev Thursday after authorities threatened to ban unvaccinated children from schools in Ukraine, which is hit by a deadly measles outbreak. Ukraine has one of the lowest vaccination rates in Europe and has recorded more than 57,000 measles cases since the start of the year, including 18 deaths, an unprecedented number since it gained independence from the Soviet Union in 1991. In mid-August, the government threatened to ban unvaccinated children from access to schools. The Kiev protesters, many of them young parents with children and some from the provinces, insisted they had the right to refuse vaccinations.
Я не бачу сенсу у сучасній ситуації взагалі використовувати вакцини як такі. Набагато краще дбати про імунітет.
Суть в тому, коли йдеш робити вакцинацію, ти підписуєш, береш на себе відповідальність. Це дуже ризиковано, тому що з дитиною будуть проблеми, це на тобі вина буде. І все життя бачити висновок, коли дитина стає інвалідом після вакцини, не дуже втішно.
Fedorchuk's 3-year-old son has not been vaccinated. Fedorchuk said a relative suffered side effects after being vaccinated. Some protesters carried banners that read, "Forced medical intervention is a crime." Authorities blame strong opposition to vaccinations among a part of the population and vaccine shortages for the current crisis. Urging parents to vaccinate their children, the health ministry organized mass vaccinations in schools in areas most affected by the crisis. In late July, the government launched a vaccination campaign against diphtheria and tetanus. Acting Health Minister Ulyana Suprun said, quote, "Vaccination coverage among children is about 70%. Among adults, it is even lower. Experts predict an outbreak of these dangerous infections. There is growing concern over global public resistance to vaccinations." The World Health Organization, or WHO, said this month measles cases nearly tripled globally during the first 7 months of the year compared to the same period in 2018. Measles, which is highly contagious, can be entirely prevented through a 2-dose vaccine, but the WHO has in recent months sounded the alarm over vaccination rates. The airborne infection causing fever, coughing, and rashes can be deadly in rare cases and had been officially eliminated in many countries with advanced healthcare systems.
Почему бояться? Нужно их делать, нужно как-то защитить своего ребенка. И если какая-то там болезнь, мы уже будем знать, что он немножко обезопасен. И даже если он заболеет, то это уже будет не в такой там жесткой какой-то форме.
The fight against Ebola in Goma, a commercial hub facing severe water shortages in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, depends on the generosity of Lake Kivu, which supplies water to health teams. Here is the report.
The golden rule to avoid the spread of Ebola is to wash your hands regularly. But for that, you need water. In Goma, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, water is essential in the fight against the virus spreading across the region. Facing shortages, Ebola response teams have had to rely on the generosity of Lake Kivu to supply health checkpoints.
The lake is crucial because it helps vulnerable people, poor people, and it helps in the fight against Ebola. When water is abundant, we can help prevent the spread of the disease.
Finding water in Goma is difficult. The city's water distribution network is outdated and only supplies a few neighborhoods. For many of Goma's inhabitants, access to water means pumping it directly from the lake.
The water problem in Goma clearly shows that only this part of the city is supplied, not the whole city. That's why a lot of people come to the lake to get their water. They also then carry some home for those who need it.
On a daily basis, entrepreneurial water suppliers organize several trips. The lake water is treated with chlorine and then distributed to reservoirs in the region. Water towers like these require 5,000 liters of water per day.
If the lake wasn't there, it would be catastrophic. Maybe the response teams would get water from elsewhere, maybe in Rwanda, in Sake, but it would be catastrophic. We would not even survive. We wouldn't survive because the lake is our only source of drinking water.
Lake Kivu is an essential force in stopping the spread of Ebola and an invaluable resource for the local population. For the people that live on its shores, the waters of Kivu give, shape, and preserve life.
U.S. authorities are investigating a mysterious neurological disorder affecting bobcats and Florida panthers that prevents them from walking normally. Neurological damage has been confirmed in a panther and a bobcat, and trail cameras have recorded footage of other panthers and bobcats with varying degrees of the condition. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission said, quote, all the affected animals have exhibited some degree of walking abnormally or difficulty coordinating their back legs. This panther is a kind of North American cougar. The FWC said it was testing for various potential toxins, including neurotoxic rodenticides, as well as infectious diseases and nutritional deficiencies. Gil McRae, director of the FWC's Wildlife Research Institute, said that while relatively few animals were exhibiting symptoms, investigators were attempting to determine the full scope of the problem. He said, quote, numerous diseases and possible causes have been ruled out. A definitive cause has not yet been determined. We're working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and a wide array of experts from around the world to determine what is causing this condition. Nigeria on Wednesday announced that 3 years had elapsed since it last recorded a case of polio, a key step towards eradicating the notorious disease in Africa.
There is no doubt that 3 years without a case of white polio virus is a historic milestone for the polio eradication program in Nigeria and the global community. This achievement will certainly not have been possible without the novel strategies adopted in the consistent fight against polio and other vaccine-preventable diseases. Completely eradicating all types of polio virus will be one of the greatest achievements in human history. It will have a lasting positive impact on the African continent and indeed the world's health system for generations to come. However, we must not take for granted our current success because it is one which we must delicately manage with cautious euphoria and resilience. Indeed, the final steps towards polio eradication in Nigeria require continued political commitment.
Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation, was the last country on the continent to suffer from outbreaks of the wild polio virus, but has recorded none since August 2016. The West African giant will submit data on its polio cases to the World Health Organization in March 2020, a move that could pave the way for the whole of the continent to be declared free of the virus. The WHO representative in Nigeria, Clement Peter, said, quote, if the data confirms 0 cases, the entire African region could be polio-free by middle of next year.
Nigeria equally will submit the final data for evaluation by March 2020, provided, of course, there is no any case recorded. If the data confirms 0 cases, the entire African region, of course, could be polio-free by middle of next year.
The polio virus infects the brain and spinal cord, potentially causing lasting muscle pain, weakness, or paralysis. The virus only infects humans, with young children highly vulnerable. It is transmitted through contact with the feces of infected individuals, such as through unsanitary water or food. It has no cure but can be prevented through immunization. Only Pakistan and Afghanistan are still battling incidents of the disease around the world. The fight against the virus in Nigeria was slowed by the Boko Haram insurgency that has torn apart the northeast of the country over the past decade. The insecurity, which has displaced more than 2 million people, hampered vaccinations in the region and prevented access to people in remote areas. While fighting jihadists, Nigeria and neighboring countries in the Lake Chad Basin have held polio vaccination campaigns to prevent the spread of the virus. According to the WHO, once a worldwide scourge, the number of cases around the globe have fallen by more than 99% since 1988. In 2012, Nigeria had 122 polio sufferers, more than half of the 223 victims worldwide. Despite the progress, 8 organizations warned there could be no let-up. Per Neil Ironside, UNICEF's deputy representative for Nigeria, said, quote, "The battle is not over yet. We have to maintain our effort and intensify them to make sure the historic gains are sustained."
Another innovations are beginning to bear fruit.
When we come back, reactions to Walmart removal of violent video game displays. Eagle News will be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Eagle News broadcasting from Washington, D.C. I am Rose Papa Angeles. Our Eagle News team in Sacramento got some reactions from video game players about the recent move of Walmart to remove displays of violent video games. Aaron Bradshaw reports. Take a look.
With numerous mass shootings across America, more recently in Texas and Mississippi Walmart stores, Walmart responded by removing signage and displays referencing violence. This included displays that contain violent images or aggressive behavior and third-person shooter video games.
So, do you believe violent video games here are the problem?
No. I feel like we've had violent video games for a very long time, and it's not something that I could say is something we could blame for all the violence. I don't believe people are inherently violent by nature at all. I know personally I've been playing video games for a very long time, and it's kind of like my escape to just like not focus on anything but the game. But it's never, like, even if, you know, it's playing a violent game or whatever, I've never been in any sort of thought to like inflict anything onto anybody. So I personally don't feel like it brings out violence in any person. If it does, then that's kind of like, that's a different topic and a different discussion because that's something that's within them, and the video games personally isn't anything to blame.
Do you think that removing these video game signs to reduce violence is an effective solution?
I don't believe that it's an effective solution. I believe it might be a necessary cause to some families or to some victims of mass shootings, but I believe a more effective solution would be through more rigorous background checks and even possible a psychiatric test administered to the people wanting to purchase these weapons. The displays being removed, I'm a huge video game nerd. It kind of negatively affects my love of the community. These video games don't necessarily cause these kids to go on huge gun riots or whatever. It's more of, in my mind, for mine and my personal friends, it's an outlet for us, and it allows us to relieve our own stress in our own way without endangering other people.
This immediate action taken by Walmart to remove certain displays is only a temporary measure. Since this memo was released, #BoycottWalmart started to trend on Twitter. Walmart continues to face pressure to stop gun sales altogether. I'm Aaron Bradshaw, and I'm 1 with 25.
Thanks, Aaron. That is today's Eagle News. Join us tomorrow for stories that matter to you. Visit our website at eaglenews.net and eaglenewslive.com. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/eaglenews and on facebook.com/eaglenews. Thank you for watching. I am Rose Papa Angeles, and I am 1 with 25.